while the kids are off making their Easter bags for their Easter egg hunt, I just wanted to zoom in on one portion of that Bible reading, which was both so beautifully read for us by Mary. It really is an incredible event, isn't it? These women who went to the tomb very early in the morning, expecting one thing, but found something completely different as they were greeted with an earthquake and an angel and the stone rolling back saying, "Don't be afraid. Jesus, who was crucified, is no longer dead. He is risen." People aren't saying he is risen indeed. It's all right. It is good news. It is good news. But I want to zoom in on just verse 11 out of the Bible reading that Mary read. Just to remind you, it's something like this. As the women were on their way back, some guards went to the city and told the leading priests what had happened. And a meeting with the elders was called, and they decided to give the soldiers a large bribe. They told the soldiers, "You must say Jesus' disciples came during the night when they were sleeping and they stole the body." Then they said, "Don't worry, if the governor hears about it, we will cover it for you." And then it said their story was spread widely amongst the Jews, and they still tell it today. What's happening here? This is only found in the Matthew version of the Easter story, but what is happening here? Could this be an Easter example of fake news? Fake news. The chief priests and the guards colluded and came up with a, what shall we call it? An alternative set of facts and spread them widely. This is fake news in action, isn't it? Just imagine being a local in Jerusalem in the days after Easter, trying to get your head around what has happened. There's no doubt the tomb is empty. You could go and see that the tomb was empty. There's no body there. But how? How is the tomb empty? That was the question they're trying to struggle with. There were some people running around saying, "Jesus is alive, Jesus is risen from the dead." And there's other people who are running around at the same time going, no. The disciples came in the middle of the night and stole the body. That's why the body's not there. And you're sitting in the middle of it going, well, how am I supposed to work out what is true and what is not? What is good news and what is fake news? We sort of know about this dilemma, don't we? Isn't this what we live nowadays? Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's the TV or politicians or our social media feeds or companies. It seems like anybody is willing to say anything to grab our attention. And it doesn't really matter if it's true or not. As long as we click on the link, or we vote for the person, or we buy the product, whether they told us the truth or not to make us do that, it doesn't really matter to them. And we are the poor suckers who have to sit in the mess of this and try to work out, well, what is tricks and what's exaggerations and what's empty promises and what's true and what's not true, what's fake and what's good news. I read a story about a man who was trying to work out a piece of advertising, whether it was true or fake. Nordstrom is a US clothing store that apparently have this piece of advertising that say they've got an unconditional return policy. If for any reason you decide that you don't like a piece of clothing, you can take it back and get a return, no questions asked. Well, this man in the story had bought a jacket from Nordstrom's about 18 months earlier. It was one of those cases that he thought he liked it, but the more he wore it, the more he realised, no, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. And so he wore it for about 6 months and then eventually just gave up on it and threw it in the bottom of the cupboard and left it there for another year until he was reminded by an ad of this Nordstrom's unconditional return policy. And he thought, why not? Why not? Let's see if this is just a gimmick to make us buy stuff or whether this is actually true and they will stand behind this promise. And so he went down to his local store and went up to the first salesman he saw with his pre-prepared speech. He said, I'm just about to put your famous unconditional return policy to the ultimate test. Here is the jacket. I've worn it lots. I've had it for 1.5 years, but I don't like it. It's the wrong colour, it attracts fluff, and I want to return the jacket for another jacket that I like. And we all go, he's dreaming. The world just doesn't work like that, does it? The world does not work like that. People promise us stuff so that we get sucked in. But when it comes to fulfilling the promise, it's a totally different thing. And we have become very cynical about these sort of things. We're so surrounded by fake news and cons and tricks and false advertising that, well, the fact is we have trouble believing anything now. And so we come to today's good news about the resurrection of Jesus, and the cynical part of us goes, really? How do we know it's actually true? The Bible tells us that the guards and the chief priests made up the story, but how do we know it wasn't Jesus' followers who made up the story? Is Easter Sunday good news or fake news? It's actually a really important question, this one. As the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, as he uses his logic to address this question, he goes, well, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, then our faith is useless, there is no hope for anybody, and we might as well all go home. After the Easter egg hunt, of course. But it's true, isn't it? If this didn't happen, then what are we doing here? But then Paul, in verse 20 of 1 Corinthians 15, goes, but if Jesus did rise from the dead, then that means that Jesus is still alive and still with us, and all those promises are true. And that when we die, we can have the assurance that we will be raised to a resurrected life with Jesus as well. The stakes are high, aren't they, on this question? Is Easter good news or fake news? Did Jesus rise from the dead or not? And how do we work this out? I guess we need to do some fact-checking. In our Bible, we have two different stories. One from the chief priests and the soldiers saying the body was stolen, and one from the disciples saying that Jesus was risen. When I try and work out what's fake and what's new, I find it helpful to look at people's motivations. Why are they saying what they're saying? I guess we could argue that both of them had motives for spreading a lie. The chief priests wanted to make sure that this movement, this way of Jesus, that was threatening the status quo of their established religion and practices, was stopped. They didn't want people thinking that Jesus was a Messiah, and they definitely did not want people thinking that that God had raised Jesus from the dead. But what about the disciples? What were their motivation? Well, we could argue that they didn't want to look like fools. After all, they had followed these people for 3 years, followed Jesus for 3 years. And maybe they wanted to sort of say, look, we weren't tricked or conned ourselves because look was what happened. Maybe they wanted a story like this so they could establish the institutionalised religion and become powerful and influential. But if you look at the biblical narrative, that's not seem to what they were interested in at all. But rather they were inspired by Jesus' resurrection to establish communities of love and caring and justice. They sought out the poor and the marginalised and offered help and compassion. They followed the example of Jesus and believed that the risen Jesus was with them. It doesn't quite sound like people who are trying to con society and establish power and influence, does it? Another thing that helps when we try and discern what is fake and what is good news is to look at the results, to look at the outcome. A politician might claim that they're going to make something happen, but what do? We'll believe it when we see it, you know. We want to see the results. So when the disciples claim that Jesus is risen from the dead, what's the results of that? Can we actually see any outcome here? What difference did that make? Well, look at the women in our Bible reading for today. They went from being distraught and broken and grieving into being joyous and passionate proclaimers of the good news. How did they change? What happened? What caused that change? Or we look at Peter, who the night before the cross was scared and broken and even denied knowing Jesus, to suddenly after Easter Sunday becoming bold and becoming one of the great leaders of the early church. Peter somehow found forgiveness for his failures and hope for the future and a sense of meaning and purpose in life. How did that happen? What caused that change? I remember reading an article by a non-Christian psychologist looking at the change in these biblical characters from Good Friday to Easter Sunday, from despair to hope, from timidness to boldness, from grief to joy. And the writer implied that something significant must have happened. He says most people can't fake this sort of change. Cannot fake a significant change like that. He writes, something must have happened. I want to suggest this morning that something did happen. We know something happened. Jesus rose from the dead. And the women and Peter and the other followers, they met the risen Jesus. And that's what happened. That's what changed them. And we continue to see this over and over again. The good news of Jesus is reflected in his followers. From the early church over the last 2,000 years right till now, we can see the evidence of the risen Jesus in the lives of his followers. Some of you are nodding, aren't you? Why? Because you know it's true. You know it's true. Because you have met him too. You have experienced this difference. I have too. I've met the risen Jesus. For me, it was through some spectacularly answered prayers that I can tell the story later on if you want me to. And it's difficult to try and explain this with logic or intellectually. But let me tell you, it's real. It's real. Jesus is alive. Jesus is risen. And I know because my life has been changed because I have met Jesus. So much so that I've given my life over to the purpose of walking this way of Jesus in all my life and to help others and teaching others about this Jesus. So how do we know if Easter is good news or fake news? How do we know that Jesus is risen from the dead? That Jesus is alive? I don't actually want you to take my word for it, even though I've just said that Jesus is alive. Really, you should work this out for yourself. Check out the sources. Read the Bible and the other sources that are around. Think about people's motivations. Consider the outcome. Consider the fruit of what has happened here. How it's played out in people's lives. It is my hope that all of us here, and if there's anyone watching online, that you might be able to see this good news of Easter. This news that Jesus is indeed alive. It is good news. And that in Jesus we can find hope and forgiveness and life. It's almost too good to be true, isn't it? Almost a bit like the Nordstrom's unconditional return policy. Just wait, I never finished the story, did I? Are you all wondering what happened? Remember what I was up to? He's walked into the shop, he's walked up to the salesman and he said, I'm about to put your famous unconditional return policy to the test. I don't like this jacket. I've had it for 1.5 years. I want a new one. Well, the salesman looked stunned, absolutely stunned. And he just shook his head and he said, for heaven's sake, what took you so long? Come on, let's get you a jacket that you actually like. I like that story. Sounds a bit like God, doesn't it? God, through Jesus, did what he needed to do at Easter, as Caitlin talked about, so that we could be offered the good news of forgiveness, hope, life, and to be with us in all circumstances. That's the offer. And if you're sitting here wondering what to do with that news, wondering what to do, how do I actually see if this is fake or not? Then I encourage you in your own heart and mind, have a conversation with God and go, you know what? God, I'd like to take you up on your offer. I'd like to see what it's like to have Jesus in my life. I'd like to see what it is to find forgiveness and hope and healing and life. I can also imagine God looking back to us with love in our eyes and saying, for heaven's sake, what's taken you so long? May we all experience the risen Jesus and the fullness of the good news of Easter in our lives. Amen. Let us reflect upon that as we sing the great hymn in